Hello, great to see you again. This video is Addiction Part 1, Desire and Reward. Why am I talking about addiction? Well, because when we have mental illness, sometimes addiction is where a lot of people go to. I've gone to addiction for many things because of my mental illness, because of my impulsivity issues that come from my borderline personality disorder. But people who have mental illness, especially people who suffer from depression, generalized anxiety disorder, or anything that battles with low mood, or anything that's sort of like building up to panic, or any stress or anxiety like that, can bring on disturbed behaviours which involve addiction. And we're talking about when we talk about mental illness, disturbed thoughts, feelings and behaviours, and one of those disturbed behaviours can be through addiction. And I want to introduce addiction as part 1, which is desire and reward. So where this addiction comes from and why we feel it. So I'm going to be talking about that. I'm not going to be talking about the brain. I'm going to go on that on another one. This is literally introducing the concept of the desire and the reward system in the body, and it will really help people who have addiction to maybe kind of see why it happens and where it comes from. I'll be doing further videos on addiction at a later date, but this is literally to introduce desire and reward. So desire and reward, excuse me reading again, this information today is taken from gone old school today. Let's take it from my brain book. So yeah, but there's stuff online if you want, and there's information in the description as well. Desire and reward. What am I talking about, Gemma? What am I talking about? Desire is hard to define precisely, but it can be described as wanting or yearning for something that you feel will bring you pleasure or satisfaction once you obtain it. There are specific brain circuits linked to desire and reward. Desire being the yearning and the wanting, reward being the pleasure. So you're yearning for this pleasure. Something happens, you see the object, you have this desire, this yearning to have it, and then you get the pleasure and the satisfaction once you have obtained it. Desire for food and sex has survival value, but desire can also be destructive if it fuels an addiction. So food we need to survive. Sex, in the broadest sense of the term, we need to survive in order to create more humans, although we are highly overpopulated at the moment. So we need those things, but we have the desire for those in order to survive. But if we then start to reach for those all the time, they're no longer about survival, it's more about fueling an addiction. So desire is made up of 2 components. There's the liking and the wanting. The liking is linked to getting pleasure. So you'll think, oh, I see that, I like it, if I have it, I'll get pleasure. Wanting is more linked to an actual need for something. So some activities can overlap. Liking and wanting, for example, can overlap when you're talking about eating, sleeping, sexual activities, because the resulting desire has a survival value. However, an individual with an addiction may want or need a drug, but not particularly like or enjoy it. So the resulting pleasure is tainted with destruction. So if you are an addict, it won't be a case of liking it. You'll feel like you want it, you need it in order to survive, but actually it doesn't have any survival value. It just makes us become more addicted. Liking and wanting seem to be somewhat different brain circuits, although dopamine is the most important neurotransmitter in cases. Warning, neurotransmitter, what does this mean? I'm just going to quickly tell you what that is, because I've got it written down. A neurotransmitter, a chemical secreted by neurons that carry signals between them across synapses. That is my only bit of brain in this thing. But what it is dopamine is something that is released when we get that fantastic pleasure. So sometimes we will reach for things in order to get that dopamine. And you've seen my dopamine dance. It makes you feel incredible. I will be talking more about the brain and this side of the pleasure seeking and addiction at another time. So pleasure seeking and addiction. Addictive substances can activate the dopamine reward system, providing pleasure even though the substances are not essential to survival. So what stuff releases dopamine? Alcohol, drugs, and I'm talking about drugs like cannabis, MDMA, cocaine. Sugar releases dopamine. Caffeine releases dopamine. Nicotine from cigarettes and e-cigarettes. You can even release dopamine when you are shopping. Something that you'll get the desire, like I really need that, and if I have it I'm going to get this reward and I'm going to feel amazing because of it. But the problem is if we constantly expose ourselves to these substances, for me it was mainly cannabis, but the more I smoked cannabis, the more I needed to smoke. So I'll explain that bit again. Chronic exposure to substances leads to the suppression of the reward circuits, increasing the amounts needed to generate the same effect. So if you are addicted to something, it's likely that in the beginning you'll be able to consume a certain amount, and then as you go along you'll have to keep taking in more and more and more, because your reward circuits aren't doing the same thing as they were. They're not releasing the same amount of dopamine. So you have to then take more drugs, and for me this meant spending more money, and sometimes having to buy harder stuff like more skunk stuff, because the stuff that I was getting addicted to was no longer releasing that dopamine, so I had to take more. And this is what happens with addiction. You keep wanting to take it to get that release, to get that pleasure, to get that dopamine rush, but the longer you stay doing this, the more you have to do. So I've said that a few times, but I just wanted to make it very clear. So if you increase your alcohol intake or smoking cannabis, eventually down the line you will probably have to spend more money, and the effects that you had in the beginning, you'd need to take more in order to get the same effects. So I've introduced desire and reward here, why we get addicted. So we get addicted because we get that rush of dopamine. The desire and the reward system that goes on through our brain means that we're not just wanting the things that we need in our life, like food, sleep, all of those. We're actually starting to desire things that make us feel better about ourselves. So if we feel rubbish, we may want to reach for alcohol or drugs to get that dopamine rush. And it can be just as simple as sitting there eating sugary food, carbohydrates, things like that. They release the same thing. So when you start this desire and this reward system going, the more you abuse it, the less you'll get the reward and the pleasure. I'll be talking more about addiction and dependency in Addiction Part 2. That'll be out next year. But hopefully this has given you a really nice introduction. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the space below. Tell me about your desire and reward system. Do you reach for those things, or have you reached for those things in the past? What was your main addiction? Have you battled with addiction? Do you care for someone with an addiction? Whatever your comments, please put them in the space below. It's really, really good to hear from you guys. Yeah, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care, be kind to yourself, and I'll see you next time. Take care now. Bye.